ठीक है जी. So you are overqualified यार. Which Pilani, something it's on par with IIT. उसके बाद why you went to Calcutta, I really don't know. Did you get everything free waiver or something, or you paid through your nose, or your father paid through his nose?
Sir, my father actually paid through his nose for the dues of IIM Calcutta.
और उसके बाद आप जो है you worked in Mumbai HSBC में, और जो भी आप कमाए थे it all went towards your house rent.
हाँ सर, दिल्ली में तो एक्चुअली काफी चला ही गया था हाउस रेंट, क्योंकि राजेंद्र नगर के रेंट रेट्स काफी हाई होते हैं.
अच्छा, you worked in Delhi or Mumbai? I thought you worked
No
in
sir,
Mumbai.
I worked in Mumbai, but after that when I shifted to Delhi for my preparation, the rent rates were very high there as well.
So I thought, so there are some past savings of HSBC tenure which you utilized in Delhi.
Yes sir.
Okay. अब now your balance account is कितना है बैंक में? Plus है minus है?
Sir, एक साल के बाद I transferred all the money to my dad's account only, and since last 2 years I'm living at my home only in Jaipur.
अच्छा, तो जयपुर बहुत अच्छा. तो बढ़िया खाना, घरेलू खाना.
That's the best part, sir.
Okay, good, yeah. So now former Chief Secretary Dr. Gopal, he will ask a few questions. He won't ask simple things like gharelu khana and all. He will grill you. He'll grill you. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Mr. Divyansh Chowdhury, can you hear me?
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, don't get scared. I'm a simple fellow. Okay. Now, are you also enamored with the IIT, IIM? Of course, you are from BIT, all right. But there are several people who are enamored with IIT, IIM, IAS. So, are you also one of such types?
Sir, I honestly do not look at this tag from that point of view. But the thing is that since this has been a natural progression from engineering to MBA and civil services, so I will be very happy to have that tag, and hopefully I'll be able to justify it in services as well.
Okay, good. Now, I keep hearing some words like, strategic planning, vision, mission. Now, how do you explain this to a layman?
Sir, vision can be explained as a long-term overview of any organization that it wants to achieve, and mission will comprise of the goals that an organization looks forward to and its core values, which are responsible for achieving the mission that it aspires to in the long run. And strategic planning would require breaking down all of this into smaller parts and completing them in synchronization so that both vision and mission values are achieved.
Okay, good. Now, if you are made the managing director of ITDC Ashok, when you get into IAS, you are asked to incrementally privatize or take a decision to privatize ITDC Ashok whole hog. In each of these alternatives, how do you proceed?
Sir, I'm actually not aware about what exactly ITDC Ashok is. Can you please elaborate a bit?
Hotel, India Tourism Development Corporation's hotel in Delhi. They have several hotels elsewhere. So a hotel has to be privatized. Okay. A government hotel, public sector hotel has to be privatized. You have two choices. One is incrementally do it. Second, whole hog do it.
Sir, though the hotel sector does not come under the strategic sectors that the government plans to go forward, in which the disinvestment will not be allowed. So definitely we should go for disinvestment, but I will go with an incremental disinvestment so that the pricing is the price of the hotel is matched perfectly with the base price is matched perfectly with the auction price, and so that the price distortion does not take place in the market. And at the same time, the efficiency, technology and human resource skills are also improved in coherence, so that the existing levels are not disrupted just frequently. So I think incremental disinvestment will be the best way to go forward.
Incremental disinvestment by selling only 20% or 25% of the share capital of the government will not give the private sector any management control, and therefore it doesn't make much difference for them. Nobody might come forward. They don't want to invest in a losing hotel.
Sir, the best thing about this is that it will be a PPP initiative where we can utilize the positives of the private sector when it comes to operational efficiency, managing the hotel, and the human resource base can be improved so as to improve the customer service. So initially the control should be with the government, because we also have certain obligations towards tourism sector, but the non-core part can be given to the private sector, and hence this should be the way forward for it.
Okay, if you are asked to give a concession for 30 years to run this hotel to private sector, instead of transferring the ownership of the assets to the private sector, what kind of criteria will you develop to evaluate the possible bids that you will get?
So there can be some criteria based on which we can make our decision. First would be what is the customer base that the hotel will cater to, and if this will affect the profitability of the private sector. Secondly, what is exactly the current system of technological base, and as well as the human resources. For example, the current employees of the hotel, are they getting good pays, and at the same time are they serving the customers well? So customer service, technological efficiency, and at the same time profitability for the private sector will be the three core issues that I will look upon.
Now, but tell me, when you want to get rid of the asset by giving away on a concession to the private operator, are you still concerned? And if you are concerned, how do you evaluate the bids in terms of enhanced customer satisfaction, enhanced customer base, enhanced technical prowess to be brought in beyond what the government has done? How will you evaluate? These are not criteria for, they cannot be monetized for better evaluation. Tricky.
So these are the three that come to my mind, and I'm not able to think apart.
All right. Don't bother. Okay. Now, tell me, if you have to select an expert to advise you as a district magistrate, you have to select a consultant. All right. Now, how do you select a consultant based on quantity come cost evaluation?
Sir, just to clarify once, is it the cost benefit evaluation that you were referring to?
No. How do you select a consultant based on his previous experience and the price he quotes? If there are 5 or 6 bidders, how will you evaluate and select the best one?
So there can be certain criteria that can be looked upon. First would be the experience of the consultant in terms of various areas of administration. Since I am the DM, so there will be multiple areas, let's say education, health, tourism, etc., that would have been the experience should have been there for those. Secondly, it also depends on which state I am serving in. For example, if I talk about Rajasthan, the major issues comprise of water scarcity and inferior condition of women. So I think the selection should be based upon the condition of the state in which I am presently working in, and at the same time my compatibility with the consultant as to how we can collaborate with each other to solve the issues.
Okay. You get the best consultant with lots of experience, and he'll ask for moon in terms of fees. So how do you give weightage to the experience and the cost, and how do you strike a balance?
Sir, one thing which can be done is the consultant who has just come on board, we can utilize his experience for the core issues that the state is facing, and the rest of the issues can be outsourced to some other consultants who have worked in those areas. So the price that he will charge.
No, you didn't get my question right. What kind of, if you have to select one consultant, what kind of weightage will you give to experience, and what weightage would you give to the cost?
Sir, experience should be definitely given more weightage to the cost. So maybe we can go.
Good.
Go with it. Yes.
Yeah. Now tell me something about these smart cities, and what is this concept of smart cities, and how are the cities selected, and what are they expected to deliver?
Sir, a smart city will be a city which is being selected on certain basis, and it will have an overhaul of smart resources, be it in terms of energy efficiency, waste management, resource allocation, etc. So there, everything in these smart cities will be definitely better than the current cities. That's the overall definition. The selection of smart cities will be done based on an SPV, which will also be able to implement the smart city, the facets of smart city. So that will be the implementation part of it. And in terms of achievement, we look forward to achieving a sustainable future because of smart cities in terms of various areas like waste management, mobility, uh, power sector distribution. For example, we have smart grids. So these are the areas because of which we look to develop a sustainable future in smart cities.
Okay, okay. I'll get back on that. Now, finally, before I pass on to my co-panelists, tell me if you are given freedom to implement blockchain technology in one area or sector of your choice in a district in Rajasthan, which sector will you select, and how are you going to select the nodes, NODES, for implementing blockchain technology in the district?
So one sector where blockchain can be used is the health sector. Rajasthan has currently come up with a scheme called Chiranjeevi scheme, where the insurance beneficiaries are being catered to as which is in coherence with the Ayushman Bharat scheme. So health is one sector in which we can implement this blockchain. Selection of the nodes should be on the basis of the information that the block is catering to. For example, if we consider the beneficiaries, so the BPL can be kept in one node, then a slightly above that income level can be kept in some other node.
All right, thank you. Vivek Garu.
Thank you, sir.
Divyansh.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, very good. I find it rather interesting and also a bit strange that your hobby is reading Indian mythology.
Yes, sir.
In these days and in these times, someone who takes interest in reading Indian mythology is certainly a matter of, interest and also a bit of concern. All the more given your kind of, educational background and all that. How did it actually happen? That you have started liking Indian mythology. Is it you look at it, these characters as some kind of a fantasy, stress busting, or what exactly are you looking for when you read them?
Sir, actually, this reading started back in my school days, because in our school curriculum we had the smaller versions of epics like Mahabharata and Ramayana. So my interest started developing from that time, and since then I really got interested and started reading these epics. At the same time, I do not think that they are just fantasy, because there have been certain proofs that these epics, especially Mahabharata and Ramayana, the events did occur. For example, the star positions which are present during the Mahabharata, especially during the war times, have been corroborated by various scientists and archaeologists that it is correct. And also, there have been various archaeological sites in which some findings have been there in Kurukshetra and other sites for this war. So I think these were not part of the fantasy, and they are part of our Indian history.
Okay. Now you are assigning them the status of history, mythology, or ethics. Where do we slot them?
So they are a part of Indian history.
But by what standards of proof can you say that they are part of history? Because history, has got the discipline of history has got certain standards. Either we should have some archaeological evidence or numismatic evidence or some kind of an inscription. So, what is your source and what is your basis for treating them straight away as history, even as the debate is going on whether to treat them as epics or mythologies. So you have taken them to a very next level. In fact, I'm a bit surprised.
Yes, sir. The debate is definitely there. But sir, as I already mentioned, there have been certain findings. For example, the timings of Ramayana and Mahabharata have said to be around 5000 and 3000 BC respectively, and these have been dated by some of the archaeologists who hold the view that the wars did take place during these times, and there have been certain findings also. So this is the basis on which I am calling it a part of history, Indian history.
If it is part of history and then the characters were mortals, how is that we have converted those mortals into gods?
Sir, it is a belief that these epics constitute a part of Indian mythology, and mythology is all about having folk genres which have gods and demigods as characters. So it is dependent on the belief of the people who treat it either as mythology or as a part of history. So the stature of gods that has been given to these characters are based on the beliefs of people who treat this as a part of mythology and not history.
Okay. Now, reading them, what kind of do you get a sense of that there is something that we can derive from this, some kind of a takeaway, to use the buzzword? What is the takeaway from reading these things? I'm sure you may be reading Mahabharata, Ramayana, and stuff like that.
Sir, there are a lot of takeaways from these epics. If I talk about Mahabharata particularly, and speaking it from an administration point of view, we can certainly draw some inferences. For example, if we talk about my favorite character, Karn, he had this zeal of public service, and he donated whatever he can to the Brahmins who came to him. So there is an instance where he donated his Kavach and Kundal to Lord Indra, despite knowing that this might lead to his death in the war. So that zeal of public service is one thing that we should definitely grasp from Mahabharata. Second can be, if we look at the perspective of war, we see that team dynamics and responsibility sharing was at a much greater level with Pandavas as compared to Kauravas, who were just playing the blame game on Bhishma and other senapatis whom they appointed. So I think that is also one of the big takeaways, that if we collaborate well and focus on getting more allies rather than just focus on defeating the other side, we can definitely achieve victory in the long run.
But since you said your favorite character is Karna, was his charity not misplaced?
Sir, I do not believe that his charity was misplaced, because he was the god of Surya Dev, and it was his characteristic that had come into him. So he always followed this belief of charity, and I think he lived up to the expectation of being called the son of sun god.
Okay, fine. Karna may have his own reasons, but since you said that there are a lot of implications for public policy and public servants and all that, now if state also starts giving this kind of a misplaced charity of freebies as part of their election campaigns and all that, do you think it's a very wise thing to do, like Karna did? Does it really hold good in modern times?
Sir, the major difference between Karna's situation and ours is that ours is an economy limited with resources. So definitely giving freebies like this today is not feasible, and is also at the same time not advisable, because even if we give out freebies, it should go to the actually needy section of the society rather than some richer part. So I think that's the major difference, and Karna was able to give because he had something that he can give.
He had that agency and he had those resources.
Yes, sir.
Okay, which he commanded. Therefore, he was in a position to give, okay, unqualified charity. Okay,
Yes.
Now, extending our discussion on this issue of freebies, we also talk about welfare, and the modern governments are supposed to be welfare governments. Okay. Now the debate today is how do we draw the line between what should be a freebie and what should be welfare? By applying what criterion do we decide that something should go as a freebie and something should be a measure of welfare?
Sir, in my opinion, we have to look at this question from both demand and supply side. If we look it from the supply side, since it is going from the government's part, so a difference can arise because of the resources that the current government has, because of which it can either be a freebie or it can be a welfare. If we talk about the demand side, the freebie and welfare part can be differentiated based on the identity and the current situation of the people to whom this is being catered to. For example, if we talk about the Ayushman Bharat, we are giving 5 lakh insurance free to people who come in the socio-economic caste census in the bottom 40%. So this is a freebie for them because they come in the lower part. But at the same time, it can be a welfare if, for example, in the Ujjwala Yojana, we are able to provide the LPG connections at the same time, but we are also charging them for it because they are in the APL section. So this should be the criteria in the demand side.
What about the elasticity or the fiscal space that should be available before we decide that something should go as a freebie? Should we not be looking into that aspect, whether the state treasury can really afford?
Yes, sir. The supply side was actually the same thing which I meant. It should be definitely considering the resources that the state government has, the fiscal space, and also the division should be as per the requirements. For example, right now in the COVID situation, the health issue is the major issue which the country is facing. So devoting most of the freebies to health sector makes a much more impact rather than other sectors. So this is also one of the criteria that we should look at.
There's another interesting character in Mahabharata who is known as Vidur, and he is known for certain qualities. Now, from your reading, can you give certain attributes which Vidur possesses?
Sir, Vidur was the younger brother of Pandu and Dhritarashtra, who was born from a maid, and he had certain qualities which definitely would have helped Kauravas had he been there for their help. First would be that he was very wise, and he always thought of long-term implications rather than the shorter ones. Secondly, he was also able to deduce very early what exactly were the intentions of Kauravas and Pandavas. Like, for example, he advised Pandavas to go to the Laksha Graha and then devised a way so that they could get out of it unharmed. So he was able to foresee what Kauravas will do so that the Pandavas do not get any harm. And thirdly, he was also a very simple guy because despite being the prime minister of the state, he lived in a very simple house and he ate also very simple food. So I think simplicity was also one of the major attributes of Vidur.
Which means to sum up Vidur and also his personality. So simplicity and then his ability to speak the truth. Are these the two characteristics which?
Sorry, sir, I am not able to hear you.
Yeah. If you have to characterize Vidur, his qualities, his personality. Hello?
Sir, yes, sir, you are audible now. Can you please repeat it again?
Yeah. If you have to attribute, characteristics and what kind of a personality Vidur was, he is one who lived a very simple life, and also he had the capacity to speak the truth without fear.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Now, if you have to, look at these qualities and also apply it to the desired qualities of.
Sir, I'm sorry, the voice.
What is the problem? Yeah. Okay, now, Divyansh. Now, are there any qualities of Vidur that today's civil servants can emulate?
Sir, firstly, as you rightly mentioned, speaking fearlessly is one of the qualities that a civil servant needs because of immense pressure, be it from the political executives or the citizens. This is one quality that is much needed. Second would be to have a long-term vision and to work accordingly because of that, so as to achieve the goals in the longer run. And third would be to always side with the right thing to do, because an integrity of a civil servant is the one that matters to him or her the most. So these are the three qualities that a civil servant.
Right. To sum it up, finally, whether this study of the so-called epics, mythologies, are perhaps in your view the ancient history. Okay. Now, if you have a choice, or if you are in a position to take a decision, will you introduce these, as part of educational curriculum?
Sir, in my opinion, these should definitely be introduced in the curriculum. The reason being, for example, since we have the new education policy, we are already talking about the 3-language formula and at the same time giving value education to students. So I believe that value education can come from these epics in a very good way, and they can definitely go a long run in developing an attitude towards the social beliefs that are present in our society, and to build the future of the students. So I think they should be introduced in the curriculum.
But at the same time, are you not risking, being called a communal state? And will it not run contrary to the objectives of the Constitution, where the people have given to themselves a secular, democratic, and socialistic republic to themselves?
Sir, our history curriculum already has the essentials of all the religions present in it. For example, if we talk about Muslims, we already have the Delhi Sultanate and Mughals present in our history. So our history, I think, is already a secular one, and introducing Mahabharata and Ramayana will not distort that, because ultimately it's a part of history and it should be read by students in a way to inculcate the good values from the characters present in these stories.
This assertion comes from the premise that you have already accorded the status of history to these epics, but many scholars may not agree to it. Anyway, on that point, we leave this conversation here. Further conversation will be continued by my co-panelist Satyanarayana. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. That was good speaking with you, Divyansh. Some new things have come to light today.
Likewise, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay, Mr. Divyansh Chaudhary.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. So you hail from Banswara.
Yes, sir.
So it has got a couple of nicknames also.
Yes, sir.
So
it is known as the It is known as the Cherrapunji of Rajasthan, and it is also known as Chhaj Kota.
What is the Chhaj Kota?
Sir, Chhaj Kota represents the small islands. It is also known as City of 100 Islands. So Chhaj Kota represents those small islands present in the Mahi River basin.
Okay, nice. You are also from Rajasthan.
Yes, sir.
So Rajasthan was in forefront in the RTI activism.
Yes, sir.
So it has got so many success stories as far as the RTI is concerned. But recently you might have seen that the act was amended and the wings were cut.
Yes, sir.
The act. So what exactly the story of this?
So the RTI Act was amended to change the powers of the CIC, of the Information Commission. And the two major attributes of this amendment were that the central government will ensure the appointments of both Central Information Commission and State Information Commission. And at the same time, they will not have a fixed tenure. The tenure will be decided by the central government. Also, the salaries and the benefits will not be same as that of the Supreme Court judges and election commissioners, and they will also be decided because of the government's discretion.
See, this is the way how almost the act has been curtailed. So it has a great impact on the people. So the people's voice will be curtailed by curtailing the act. What do you say?
Sir, I think there won't be an implication for people's voice to be curtailed. The reason being that the appointments, even if they are politically motivated, they would still be involved in ensuring transparency and accountability of providing information to people. So I think the core function of the commissions remains the same, and the RTI Act will always be in the center of that. So there will not be an issue of curtailing of information given to people because of this.
No, why they were prompted to change the act itself, first of all, if that is not the intention of the government?
Sir, the intention was to specify the position of the commissions and to clarify whether they hold the same position as the Election Commission and Supreme Court judges or not. So I think a better position was given to these commissions, and at the same time their powers were specified so as to give better accountability in terms of RTI.
Okay. So of late we have been hearing the election reforms as part of the reforms in the election process. The government introduced electoral bonds.
Yes, sir.
Are you aware of that?
Yes, sir.
So tell us, what exactly are the electoral bonds and why there is a controversy for these electoral bonds?
Sir, electoral bonds are promissory notes or debt or instruments which are issued by the SBI to people so as to fund the political parties without any debt. So there are 5 types of donation ranging from 10,000 to 1 crore. These are the 5 limits, and at the same time these are able so that people are able to fund the political parties. And the major issues because of these electoral bonds are, firstly, the anonymity. Previously, any donation above 20,000 rupees was to have a particular name in front of it, but now because of the anonymity, it is said that it can lead to issues of funding because of black marketing. Secondly, there have been issues of crony capitalism because the limits of 7.5% on profits of company has been removed, because of which there can be issues of shell companies investing in these bonds. So these are the major issues related to electoral bonds.
What is your view by issuing the electoral bonds? The parties in power, are they resorting to unethical practices?
Sir, in my opinion, they are not resorting to any unethical practices. There are some reasons for it which were also apprehended by the Supreme Court recently. Firstly, the anonymity issue is not that big because the banking channels are being preferred, digitized mode is there, and at the same time, KYCs are done comprehensively so as to know that the donor is actually a legal person who can donate. And also, apart from that, foreign corporates are not allowed to invest. Only Indian businesses and corporates and individuals are allowed to invest. And also there is an issue of black money, which is because of the electoral bonds. But I think it is not a contentious issue because these bonds are not tradable. They can only be invested by the person who has invested in it. So I think it is ethical to issue these bonds by the political parties.
Did you watch which party is gaining the most out of these bonds?
Sir, currently the ruling party is getting the most out of these bonds. In the last elections, I think around 95 to 96% contributions went to the ruling party.
Yeah. So this person purchased the bonds and gave the bonds to the political party. It's very clear that who has purchased these things. Don't you think that there will be a quid pro quo transactions between the person and the party?
Sir, actually, I'm not aware about the meaning of the word quid pro quo. So can you please elaborate on that?
So I give this and you give me that. That's called the quid pro quo. So I give you the pen and you give me something.
Sir, since the donation is anonymous, so I think that thing will be taken care of and that's why issuing of electoral bonds will not be an issue here.
No, you didn't understand. Anyway, let me explain this quid pro quo. Quid pro quo is like this. I bring you an electoral bond. It is like an FDR. It's not like a promissory note. So I give you 10 crore from
Yes, sir.
electoral bond and tell you, साहब आपके पास जो फाइल पेंडिंग है वो जल्दी क्लियर कर दें. Then you say ठीक है हम कर देंगे. So those electoral bonds are encashed and credited to your party account,
Yes,
BJP or whatever it is. And in return, the file is cleared and I get the land or license or whatever it is. So that is quid pro quo. Something for something. I give you electoral bond, you give me permission or license. वही हो रहा है. आप इतना, you are so innocent. मैं क्या करूं राजस्थान में? All the greatest fellows who are using these electoral bonds are from Rajasthan and Gujarat.
Yes, sir.
आप periphery में, I think, being a Chaudhary, you are a landed man, is it? Chaudhary का मतलब है landed. So you don't know anything about business or BJP. Okay.
Okay,
Chalo,
Mr. Divyansh.
Yes, sir.
I think you might have read the Constitution, Article 51AH, fundamental duties.
Yes, sir. Article 51AH.
Yes. What exactly that article?
Sir, no, I'm not able to recall the exact provision.
Okay, that's not a big deal. That is about the scientific temper. You have to develop the scientific temper and you have to propagate the scientific temper. Okay. Now, you got a National Science Olympiad in quizzing. So that means you are a person touch with the science, vagara.
Yes, sir.
And you say that mythology is nothing but the history. Everything happened. So how can we reconcile as a bureaucrat and as a citizen of this country that mythology and history both are one against the Article 51AH?
Yes, sir.
If you are able to hear me, at least I will ask a few questions.
Yes, sir, definitely.
You are a very highly qualified engineer from BITS Pilani. सवाल ये था कि scientific temper. Automatically, we presume that you would have inculcated as a science talent scholarship and this quizzing and BITS Pilani product. You would have inculcated in yourself the scientific temper. तो क्या आपको मिला क्या कार्बन डेटिंग के लिए सम राम का धनुष और अर्जुन का बाण or something like that? How can we say it is history? Epigraphic evidence कुछ है क्या? या Marco Polo or somebody wrote that I witnessed this Kurukshetra Yuddha and I watched it for 18 days. Oh, what a bhayankar Yuddha it was. Or somebody, Hyun Song or Niccolo Conti, somebody must have written, some foreign traveler or somebody's book. Yeah, on what basis can I say that it is history?
So recently there was a news that the birthplace of Hanuman was discovered in the Anjanadri hills of AP, and it was related to the footprints that they found in those areas, and they attributed it to Hanuman. And there have been similar.
That's okay, but Hanuman ka asli print kiske paas hai to compare it? I will say that your fingerprints are at the scene where some girl was murdered. I am saying it, but unless
Yes,
I get your real fingerprints and compare, तो इसमें हनुमान का फुटप्रिंट किसी के पास नहीं है.
Yes, sir. This I am not able to correlate with, sir. Sure.
ठीक है. Then Somashekhar garu.
Yeah.
మీరు ముగింపు ముక్తాయింపు చేయండి.
Yeah, Divanshu.
Good evening, sir.
Okay. Now, you are IIM, BITS, a lot of corporate experience. Please tell me in corporate India, in the last few weeks, a major change has happened at the Bajaj Group. A former national table tennis champion has become the chairman in place of Rahul Bajaj. So what exactly prompted it? Doesn't Rahul Bajaj believe in his two sons who are holding important positions? What do you read from this?
No, sir, this is not a case of not having a belief in your own sons, but it is a case of extending your company's vision and mission promise to the stakeholders in the longer run, so that the company remains profitable, it is efficient. So I think a person with expertise needs to run the company, and that's why this person must have been appointed as the chairperson.
No, this Neeraj Bajaj was heading Mukund Steel. Okay. And Rajiv Bajaj took the company to the next level in a way, because now Bajaj Group is one of the world's largest producer of two-wheelers.
Sorry, sir, I'm not exactly aware about all of this.
Okay. You know what? You also edited this Vani
Yes, sir.
magazine at IIM, or is it at BITS?
Sir, it's in BITS Pilani.
BITS Pilani. Now, did you enjoy the advantages, freedoms of an editor? You could publish whatever was given and write what you wanted?
No, sir. Actually, after we had written down all the stories, poems, and all the articles that we wanted to publish, it actually went to the dean's office and it was reviewed there. And after that, only we got the final publishing.
Do you believe that what the editor should have freedom to write what they want, criticize, and also journalists should have the right to criticize governments, and currently the situation does not seem to be matching this kind of freedom. What is your view?
Sir, in my opinion, the right to constructive criticism should always be there. For example, if we talk about the cases of sedition that have come up, the Supreme Court has said that anything apart from the things which do not spread disaffection towards the state can be published. So I believe that constructive criticism should be the way forward, but at the same time, preserving the integrity and unity of any organization, college in case of BITS Pilani, or the country is also paramount. So there should be a balance between both of them.
What is constructive criticism?
Sir, for example, during our times in BITS Pilani, there was an issue with the mess workers when they went on strike, and there was the food which was being made available to the students was not of a good quality. So in writing for that is constructive criticism because it is responsible for the health of the students. But criticizing the institution in any way which is going to hamper the image of the institution is destructive criticism.
No, criticizing the government on vaccines, its policy, and how a lot of people are not getting vaccines, dual pricing. Is this constructive criticism, or amounts to a larger issue where journalists can be hauled up and even jailed?
Sir, in my opinion, this amounts to constructive criticism because the vaccine policy of the government is dynamic, and at the same time it is also being made at a national level so as to reach out to different people. So the views of the journalists should definitely be taken into account so that the vaccine policy can be made even more better so as to cover the entire population. So this should amount to constructive criticism.
Even in social media, the slightest criticism of the politician or government, now the government is taking action, putting people behind bars, and the government is also planning to bring in more regulations to control mainline media, even OTT platforms. Now, as a young, bright engineer, management student, corporate, and doing many things, do you think this is the right direction that we are moving into, or freedoms should be preserved?
Sir, in my opinion, the response of the government in this situation is apt. The reason being, if we even talk about the recent IT laws that have come up, which the social media intermediaries were not ready to adhere to, there are various issues. For example, we have the issues of fake news, we have morphed images, and then several other issues on the internet, because of which there can be a problem in preserving the integrity and unity of the nation. So I think a delicate balance needs to be maintained between both of them. And in this case, especially the social media intermediaries, law which the data protection bill the data protection law can definitely be introduced, so as to have clear guidelines as to what the rules should be for these intermediaries.
No, you already have enough laws wherein any such activity can be probed and prosecuted. So why do you need blanket regulations and power to control the entire media for this? There are perhaps aberrations which you can easily deal with, because you have the entire state machinery with you.
Sir, as I already mentioned, there are various issues that a country faces because of the freedom of speech and expression guaranteed by Article 19(1)(a). But even these freedoms are not absolute. If we talk about the freedom of privacy, Article 21 or Article 19(1)(a), they are subject to certain restrictions. So these restrictions are the things that the government should make their laws upon, so that a delicate balance is maintained between freedom of expression and having reasonable restrictions.
Okay. Anyway, let us go to another subject. You've done in management studies, case laws, different projects. You have a lot of experience you've gained in corporate. How do you think this will help in your career to solve problems of the poor, diverse populations and all that, when your orientation and training is somewhat different?
So during my stint at HSBC and also my NSS experience at BITS Pilani, I was able to gain some of the qualities which I think I can use in administration. For example, in HSBC, I was one of the guys responsible for launching UPI 2.0. So having team dynamics and leadership skills were being imparted because of that. Secondly, in NSS, I got the skills of, I actually had to teach the students. So there was the skills that came to me were to have patience, and at the same time empathy and compassion towards students who are not able to understand things at one go. So I think these are some of the qualities that I can use in administration.
All these are prior to your IIM, prior to HSBC, prior to all the corporate things you have done. Perhaps you must have forgotten all that.
No, sir. Actually, I was able to have them during HSBC as well. So I think they are intact here.
Okay. Anyway, all the best. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, Divyansh, now we should conclude.
Sir, with your permission, I would like to ask one question.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Divyansh, so we are in the discussion. Meanwhile, I lost my power here.
Yes, sir.
So I was asking about the 51AH science and that scientific temper. So how can you reconcile between these two? That's my question.
Sir, the only thing that I can think of is maybe giving the proofs of evidences that have been collected, so as to tell them that these were actually part of historical events. So maybe having sessions with archaeologists and people who have delved into these topics can definitely act as a way of providing scientific temper.
So you think that science and mythology both are one and the same?
Sir, mythology depends on the belief of people. So I think that's a very subjective topic. But if there are certain things within that story, for example, in Mahabharata and Ramayana, the star's position was there, which could be corroborated by various people. So I think they can be reconciled in some ways, definitely.
Okay. Last question is, you said that your favorite hero is Karna.
Yes, sir.
So, Divyansh, tell us what a civil servant can learn from the character called Karna.
So there are a few things that I really like about Karna. The first one is definitely the zeal of public service, because of which he was able to donate his things to all the needy people who asked for it. The second one was he was very passionate about what he wanted to achieve. He knew that he was a warrior from within, and he wanted to rule a country and get to the top. So I think that passion is definitely one other thing that a civil servant should aspire for in his career. And the third one was that he gave up everything for the eternal bond of friendship that he shared with Duryodhan. So I think that was also one of his core values, that he valued his friendships above everything else. So a civil servant should also value his personal and professional relationships in such a way so as to prosper further in his or her career.
The first thing, if Karna was such a great person, why he was not made the hero of Mahabharata? He was not the hero of the Mahabharata.
Yes, sir.
But here, what we observe is he is bound by gratitude, isn't it? Because at a very critical juncture, Duryodhana came and helped him to maybe restore his self-respect, vagera. And as a result,
Yes,
he almost gave his life to Duryodhana. That is the bond, the gratitude. But when we take a person, gratitude is one quality and one value. But the most important thing is a person should always stand on the righteousness.
Yes, sir.
Righteousness, isn't it? Do you agree with me?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
So Karna, knowing fully well that the Duryodhana is standing on the wrong cause and the Pandavas in the right one, but he was supporting all the time his friend Duryodhana, bypassing the righteousness. But what's more important is a civil servant has to take a path in a conflict between two values. He has to take the right one. Okay, that's what we know as prioritization of the values. So now, where is the prioritization as far as this character is concerned?
Sir, definitely there was an issue with Karna because of which he was not able to go to the righteous path. The biggest issue with him was that he had an inferiority complex from Arjun, because he always wanted to prove that he is the best archer, and Arjun was being proclaimed as one by Guru Drona. So that was the biggest issue with him, and all his deeds, right from being crowned as the king of Anga to his death, were because of this fear that he should not lose this position to Arjun. So I think that was his biggest fear, because of which he was not able to go down the path of righteousness.
It is like, you see, many of the IAS people, they say that, okay, if I talk against somebody, then I may lose this position. So I should be cling to this position. So I'm not on the right path. So I may go in the wrong path, but I want the position. Do you mean to say the same?
Yes, sir. That's exactly what I mean to say.
Okay, Divyansh, right? It's nice speaking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Likewise.
Okay, Divyansh, we have taken virtually an hour and a half, 6:30 to 7:58. So
Yes,
you're a
sir.
very interesting person. But to some like me, somewhat there appears to be a conflict. A man with a good scientific background, engineering background, management background, somehow got influenced by the non-existing historical aspect of mythology. Anyway, we leave it at that. But you are very good in communication skills. You certainly speak very clearly. You are able to put across your thoughts. And you are a very pleasant person. You have a nice smiling face. These are all your positive qualities. What are the areas in which you have to work for the next 50 days? Because the interviews won't take place so soon in Dholpur House. So
Yes, sir.
my other panel members will give you. I only wanted to sort of correct you. This reasonable restriction part is confined to Article 19 only. It
Yes, sir.
doesn't extend to Article 21. As far as
21.
21 is concerned, there is no reasonable
Yes, sir.
restriction. There is another article relating to religion, Article 25, where also there is some kind of a restriction subject to public
Yes,
order,
sir.
peace and tranquility, etc. Otherwise, all the remaining fundamental rights have no restrictions. Absolutely no restrictions at all. So the
Yes, sir.
right to privacy is derived from the word life in Article 21. Therefore, there is no question of restriction on right to privacy. That is a right. It's a fundamental right granted. Okay. Now, you have answered, of course, from whatever you think is the right thing, but honestly speaking, that wouldn't give you good marks. To get good marks, you have to mention both sides of a particular coin. That is a perspective. There are two opposing perspectives. So you could have mentioned about the same thing, your mythology. That's your hobby. You'll keep it aside. There are some who say that this mythology is indeed history. And there are some others who say, no, it is not history because it has not been tested with any empirical data or scientific experiments like this carbon dating, etc., etc. There are
Yes,
no
sir.
eyewitnesses, eyewitness accounts, no epigraphs, no inscriptions, etc., etc. And leave it like that. You don't have to charm. You see, you are not here in the syllabus committee appointed by Shri Narendra Modi ji to revise the syllabus. There are others who are doing it and they will do it. Whether it is good or not, I have no idea, but then that's it. So you as a serious aspirant for this civil service, don't identify too much with this kind of antediluvian. That is such a, it is some kind of a view which doesn't gel with your scientific background. So you be very
Definitely.
careful with that. So regarding other matters, Dr. Gopal, our former Chief Secretary, and Dr. Vivek, they'll give you. Okay? Gopal Garu.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Divyanshu Chaudhary, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I can hear you, sir.
I totally concur with what the chairman had said about the appraisal of your performance in this interview. I fully agree. Specifically about smart city, before I comment on the other issues, I will say that the selection of smart cities is based on certain challenges at the state level, because there is an intra-city challenge at the state level. And after filtering, then some proposals are sent to Government of India, and that's where the further finalization takes place, number one. Two,
Sure, sir.
the smart cities numbers that each state would get is based on the total urban population of the state and the total municipalities, municipal corporations, town panchayats notified under the Act. Therefore, some states get more smart cities, some get less number of smart cities. And
Sure, sir.
the objective of smart city is not to immediately create some comforts and facilities to the citizens of that city, but the objective is to demonstrate, give an opportunity to demonstrate, as they have been given opportunity at the challenge level, about their capabilities to turn around cities by establishing smart city corporations. Okay.
Okay, sir. Yes, sir.
What a smart city corporation could do, but this leaves them with less of normal political interference, but to professionally achieve what they want to. Normally in a municipality, the resources are sparsely distributed. They take up a drainage length, it's half complete, they go to some other ward because the corporator wants to share the resources to his ward also. Whereas the corporation gives an opportunity to the city to demonstrate that they are really capable of turning around, and therefore to tell the prospective investors that compared to some other cities, you come here and then invest. That's the whole objective. So it's a
Sure, sir.
demonstration or showcasing the talents of that particular city managers.
All right.
Yes, sir.
So this is
Definitely.
what I wanted to say specifically about this. Otherwise, most of the interview appeared to me as if it was a question answer session on epics and Mahabharata. But you can
Yes,
expect
sir.
this because you are answering the questions generally well, which pertain to your domain. So you are likely to be grilled. In order to take you to the depths, you are likely to be grilled, all right? And
Yes, sir.
you are also likely to be challenged. Sometimes the interviewers would have appeared as if, they are questioning somebody in the establishment, the ruling party, like from an opposition, some question. But that is to test your capacity to
Yes, sir.
withstand pressure and antagonism. So
Yes,
once
sir.
you do well, you can expect all this. And then once you are able to withstand this, then your personality comes out in the personality test. All right. I don't know about one question whether you feigned ignorance or you were tactical
Which one, sir?
about quid pro quo.
Oh, no, sir. I
You
actually
appeared
didn't
as
know the
if-
meaning of
you
quid.
appeared as if you were dishonest in replying to that. And all right, if you sincerely did not know, it's okay. It was explained to you.
Yes, sir.
So you have the right potential. I think you will do well. I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, sir.
Divyansh, as far as the issues we discussed, I was in for a bit of surprise when you have elevated Mahabharata and Ramayana to the level of history. Even as debate is going on, where to place them in the overall corpus of literature that is available to us, what the status should be accorded to them. Do they fall in the realm of epics or mythologies? But then straight away you have taken them to the next level. Well, it's a matter of great controversy. Now, what I would like to suggest to you is that you somehow tend to start with a premise that things are already established, even where there is an ongoing controversy.
Okay, sir.
Okay. And this is what precisely chairman has already said. When different views are available, you start with different views which are there already. Okay. But then
Yes, sir.
when I was asked, no, sir, their history is already established and all that. You see, our entire history is also constantly under review.
Yes, sir.
I'm sure you have read a lot of Indian history as part of preparation for this exam. Now,
Yes, sir.
can you say with certainty what are the origins of Harappa Mohenjo-daro civilization? What are the causes of its disappearance? Can you say with any degree of certainty today?
No, sir. They are constantly being reviewed. Yes, sir.
Being reviewed. No, if that is the case, then how can you say that Mahabharata took place? People who are there, they were mortals, and if they were mortals, why are they being deified? Why are they being worshipped as gods? Did Rama really exist in flesh and blood? You see, how can we come to such conclusions?
Yes, sir. I understand, sir.
Yeah.
But just one question to that. So, if this question is asked that is this really a mythology or a part of history, what should be the apt answer according to you?
That is precisely what I'm saying. I mean, by now I think you should have picked up what the.
So, is it wise to leave it at the controversy part only?
That is the way things stand today. No,
Okay.
can you tell me with any degree of certainty that Mahabharata war actually took place? No, people are still probing.
Yes, sir.
We are still probing. It's not as if like the solar system. Earlier, people thought that sun was going around the planet Earth, but today
Yes, sir.
now it is established the other way around. So that is what science is all about. That you establish with proof, with evidence, and with degree of certainty, repeatability, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Particularly issues like, historical past, all the more anything, related to social sciences, they are so fluid and dynamic. They keep changing with more research,
Yes, sir.
more evidence, more contrary evidence coming in. A lot of churning of ideas take place. So in matters of, social sciences, it is always a very fluid situation. And unless there is a broad agreement, among scholars, till such time you cannot say with any degree of
Certainty.
certainty that this is the thing.
Definitely, sir.
Okay. So this
Yes,
is
sir.
where I think you have to exercise some caution. Your answer somehow tended to give me an impression that you are more of a status quoist, if I may use that word, which means you support whatever is happening today is right. And this is something which is not expected of a candidate for civil service. Maybe once you join civil services, you may have to toe the line of the government after you become a public servant and you are governed by certain code of conduct.
Yes, sir.
Okay. But when you are merely a candidate for, aspiring candidate for civil service, what the service commission would normally expect you is that whether you are capable of looking at different dimensions, different facets of a given issue, and you weigh and consider, you have that ability to weigh and consider, or simply by theories which are, parroted, and which are, ruling the times. So somehow you tend to buy, the prevailing theories and all that without any, critical mind. So that is a bit of, undesirable quality, if I may say so.
Sure, sir. I will work on this, sir.
You just pay some attention to that and be aware of contrary views as well. It is not as if UPSC is looking for someone who can straight away go and implement government policies. No. They are looking for a thinking person. They are looking for a certain qualities of the public servant, such as objectivity, neutrality, rationality, okay, which seem to be a bit wanting in your answers at the moment, the way you have replied to some of these questions. So
Okay.
that kind of an objectivity, that's why, I tried to relate you to Vidur's character. Vidur did not mince words.
Yes, sir.
Vidur was so brutally frank with,
Dhritarashtra.
brother Dhritarashtra. When the discussion ensues between them, he exposed that you are blind because of your filial piety, because of your too much of love for your son.
Yes, sir.
You are not only physically blinded, but you are also mentally blinded.
Yes, sir.
Because he got, carried away by, his greatest admiration and love and affection for his son. So therefore, he was not able to think clearly, and this is what clearly Vidur had told him on his face.
Yes, sir.
So this is the kind of neutrality, this is the kind of objectivity, this is the kind of spunk which is required. You understand the meaning of the word spunk.
Yes,
So
sir.
this is the spunk that is required for a civil servant. Only then India will survive as a democratic socialistic republic.
Sure, sir.
Otherwise, you will become simply a party worker, and there won't be any difference between a party worker and a public servant. Isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, your loyalty and your fidelity must be to the Constitution of India, not to the people in power.
Yes, sir.
Okay? Yeah. I think if you keep these things in mind as a broad framework against which you look at various issues and try to understand them, I think you can make a better impression on the board and will stand a fairly good chance of getting selected. But otherwise, you are good
Thank you, sir.
material. You are able to articulate well. You are able to express well. But then, this particular dimension is somehow is missing.
Sure, sir. I'll work on this, sir.
Yeah, just
Definitely.
keep this at the back of your mind, and you try to look at things in this from this framework.
Yes, sir. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Divyansh,
Yes, sir.
this is a personality test. It is to know certain traits of the candidate. Okay. We want to know whether you are balanced in your approach, whether you have got the inquisitive mind, whether you are creative, whether you are aware of what is expected from a civil servant. So there are many traits which we want to see. So the question which I asked on the amendment to the RTA Act. So my question is, because of this amendment, whether the people are disempowered, whether the people are disempowered by this amendment. You said that no. But if you can see, earlier, the chief commissioner, he was a constitutional authority.
Yes, sir.
Okay, but now he is now as like you and myself. So will be transferred in the will and wish of the present regime. If you discharge the duties as per their wishes, then you will be in power. Otherwise, will be taken away. Now the question is, Divyansh, Divyansh.
The internet is also tired.
Okay, I will.
I think, yeah, Chapedi.
Yes, yes, sir.
Listen.
Divyansh, a disempowered person cannot empower the citizen. That's a very, very important aspect. The RTA Act is to empower the citizen, but the Commissioner of Information, if he is disempowered, how can he empower the citizen? So that is the bigger issue here, and that is to be taken into consideration. The second aspect is on quid pro quo, which the chairman sir has already explained to you. So I need not go for that. The third aspect is about the 51AH. So there I put the mythology. So first history that to science. So this is an issue which you have to think about, because we want you people to dive into. Ultimately, we have to see what exactly is given in the Constitution, what we have to discharge on the field. Finally, when you come to the character called Karna, you need not bring this person into the conversation at all, but you brought this character. And when I ask you about how a bureaucrat, what a bureaucrat can learn from this character, so you have given certain positive aspects. No doubt he is a great personality. But one thing we must understand, in a very critical juncture, there will be a clash between a good bureaucrat and a great bureaucrat. The differentiation comes when he faces a challenge and a dilemma. So here, the values are clashing, and a bureaucrat has to prioritize the values. You said that because of the Angaraja, he was unable to talk to or maybe convince Duryodhana. That is that goes against the character of Karna himself. So here, unfortunately, Karna didn't decide between these two, and he made his gratitude as the #1 value all the time. And as a result, he failed to create the impression of the great personality. So that's the reason when we want to introduce a word, a character in our conversation, we must be very careful because the other person may come in some other way. That's the reason in the interview, we must be very careful while wording, and we must be careful enough to give that much information which is required. If we give more, then we are going to give a lot of scope for them to say come in other way. So if you can take all these things, I think you can easily get into the list, and wish you all the best.
Divyanshu, quickly a couple of points. One, this change of guard at Bajaj Group, I think is a bit unusual in many of the family held concerns, and because the son invariably succeeds. So here is a case where somebody else has been brought in to be the chairman, and you should look into the company, how is it doing, what are the performances and all that, and have some depth of understanding. One. The second thing on this freedom of speech regulations and what the government is trying to do, I think you should definitely read up, because when you become a bureaucrat, you are expected to be more informed, more impartial, more balanced. Therefore, I think in a democracy, the use of sedition laws should be quite rare, because most of the journalists, most of the people are expressing their fear or criticizing the government, some policy, but not often related to national interest or security. So the regulations intend to even muffle protests, muffle criticism. So I think you need to read more and be more balanced in your understanding of these regulations, because the least you can do in a democracy is protest. And finally, with the permission of the chairman and Vivek Garu, this mythology, history, Mahabharat aspect, if Divyanshu wants to further argue, I can give one or two references. Otherwise, you'll be appealing more to Professor Murli Manohar Joshi or some of these education ministers and India government, and you'll be completely mistaken. There are one or two publications in scientific journals on events in Mahabharata. For example, some scientists have used solar eclipses, data of solar eclipses, to say that the killing of X by Arjuna with the help of Krishna was because of a solar eclipse, because this X said, Arjuna vowed that I will kill this X before sunset today, failing which I will not further take part in the battle. Now this chap completely vanished into the thin air, and Arjuna could not find him. So Krishna used his Sudarshan Chakra and created darkness at some point in the day. Then this chap appears. Then Krishna says, now kill him. So Arjuna uses his arrow and kills this chap. Now this is construed by some as a solar eclipse. And they have gone through solar eclipse data and said in some 4100 or some date, this solar eclipse happened. Therefore, there is proof that this war happened. So this is one scientific paper. And another is about dating, Vedic period using equinoxes. Again, this has been published by, the Birla Institute, Birla Science Center in Hyderabad, Dr. B.G. Siddharth. But these are all, very, very, small episodes which, give only a clue, but they are nothing conclusive about it. Therefore, I think even if you are passionate to defend, the least you can do is cite 2 examples and somebody forces you further. Otherwise, I think it is best to take a rational, scientific approach to the whole issue and not get into this trap. That is my suggestion. And otherwise, you are very highly qualified, very well equipped, and please do well and all the best. Thank you.
Okay, Divyansh, all the very best. God bless you. Bye-bye.